Hi everyone, this is the next video of the poem Ode on a Grayson Urn. So just take back 1 second. Okay, so first of all, what is an ode? Okay, an ode is a poem that expresses a writer's thoughts and feelings, and some of the most famous poems that have been written in the past are poems like Ode to Autumn, or Ode to Nightingale, or Ode to a Grecian Urn, which were all written by John Keats, the famous romantic poet. So because this poem then is an ode, it takes the form of an ode. It is the writer's thoughts and feelings about the topic they're talking about, and they're talking about a Grayson Urn. Shouldn't say Grayson Perry, just Grayson Urn, but the Grayson being Grayson Perry, who you might have seen on the TV recently with a new art show that's happening at the moment in this lockdown phase, but a perhaps eccentric contemporary artist. Okay, so in this poem, it's about one of Grayson Perry's urn. On the front cover of your anthology, Poems of the Decade, you can see one of Grayson Perry's urns, so you can see the sort of thing that we're talking about. Okay, so firstly, an ode, a poem expressing the writer's thoughts and feelings on the topic. So here, a poem with the writer's thoughts and feelings about one of Grayson Perry's urns. Now, as I said, there was an ode written by John Keats called Ode on a Grecian Urn. So you can see the intertextuality between the two poems, okay, the link between the two poems. This poem, in many ways, has been inspired or influenced by that earlier Keats poem. And in the early Keats poem, John Keats, the poet, he was reflecting on how when you look at these urns, and there's an image of a kind of typical Grecian urn there, they used to depict the lives of people in the ancient Greek times. And so Keats was looking at that urn and reflecting on that idea. And then Turnbull, the poet here, has taken the same idea that if we were to look at an urn from the artist Grayson Perry, who depicts lives normally of the working classes, what in years to come would people look back and think life was like? Okay, so it's that kind of idea that's been played around with here, I suppose. So just by way of illustration, so this is the vase I was talking about. This is the one that's on your front cover of your anthology. So you can see the style of pottery, the classic shape of the vase or the urn, but rather than a noble scene or a godly scene that you would have in the Grecian urns, like the one on the previous slide, actually Perry has images of cars and things on this particular one. And then you can see some others as well. I know there's a bus with as if it's going to hell, so make of that what you will. Bright colours being used, the very modern or contemporary and in some ways slightly abstract art being presented on these urns. So this is the inspiration for this poem. Turnbull looking at these sorts of urns and thinking, in years to come, if someone was to discover these urns, what would they think life was like? Because typically, in what we know about history is from the archaeological finds, is from digging up artifacts and looking at what they show us, and then kind of making assumptions or inferences. So that's what Turnbull kind of is considering in this poem and thinks about and ponders a little bit. So just some interpretations and some touches on form and structure before we look in the poem in detail. Like Please Hold, so the poem that we're looking at as well this week, it's a playful poem, okay? In both of them, there's an element of satire and comedy. So the poems that shouldn't be taken kind of too seriously. You should enjoy them, you should find them fun and lighthearted in some ways, but perhaps arguably in the nature of satire, the idea of a satire being something that challenges or criticizes, but using humor to do it, that perhaps there is a deeper undertone to be considered with these poems. Again, that'll be up to you to decide, and I will take you through my interpretation of the poem in this video. There'll be lots of others, and I'm trying to draw your attention here as well to some of the different interpretations that there are of this poem. But one is that it is a satire, and therefore it's perhaps criticising modern youth, particularly the working class modern youth, how they live their lives, is one interpretation of the poem. However, the alternative is just that this is a play on Perry's art. Someone is looking at that urn and pondering those ideas and just having fun with it and think, oh, what would people make of society today if they were judging it based on this urn? So just that interesting, playful idea, possibly. Another alternative presentation is this isn't a condemnation or a criticism of the youth of today, but actually it's almost a celebration, or at least a kind of admiration of how bold, reckless, free, lacking responsibilities they are, that there's something possibly that could be admired there. So again, as you look at the poem, think perhaps, what do you think? Is it criticism? Is it judgment? Is it celebration? Is it just a play on these ideas? What do you think? Yeah, and because also odes were often a celebration of the subject matter, you know, Ode to Autumn or Ode to Nightingale by Keats were both kind of expressing the poet's admiration of those things, love of those things, okay, particularly in that romantic style, you know, love of nature, love of the bird, and love of the season, and all that sort of stuff. Okay. Yeah, I sort of said that really. So the final stanza, you do get this question about, you know, what will people think of society today if they were judging it based on this bit of pottery? The structure of the poem now in the portal, as always, I've saved the analysis from interpreter.com and genius.com, and they are really, really good for structure. So I'm not going to, repeat all of that information here. You can read that yourself and think about it. It's really, really interesting. The key thing is that I've already said that this poem was inspired by John Keats's poem Ode to a Grecian Urn, and it's inspired in terms of the structure as well. It's kept the same 5 stanza structure. It's kept to almost identical rhyme scheme. So you can look at that in more detail. But I guess the poem makes the point then of combining the old and the new. So it sticks with the old, classic, very regular form and structure of Keats's ode, and yet the subject matter of the poem is very contemporary, and it's about these wild youths, and the language is very colloquial and very informal, which contrasts against that very formal, classical structure and style of the classic ode. And yeah, I've said this already, but just say it again. So those urns that I showed you right at the start, in the top corner, that classic Grecian urn, you know, the scenes on those urns were quite often of gods or of noble people, high-class people, whereas Perry's urn focuses on the working classes. So it's very different there. Okay, so into the poem itself. Again, I'm not going to read it to you, but you should read it obviously first before you go through the video, form your own ideas, and then look at this and think about these as well. Okay, so hello, what's all this here? So it starts in a very conversational, very informal tone with the hello, what's all this here? Okay, so the suggestion that this is a light-hearted poem, that it'll have some elements of comedy, that it shouldn't be taken too seriously, can be conveyed right through the opening. A kitschy vase some Shirley Temple Mank has knocked out. So kitsch, if you don't know, is kind of something which is over-decorated in poor taste. A mank is a failed imitation at something. And Shirley Temple was a child American actress who was kind of overly cute in appearance. Now, Grayson Perry, as you can see here, is known for cross-dressing as a kind of alter ego called Claire, which is this girl child, basically, like Shirley Temple. So Turnbull perhaps is mocking or making fun of, or just having a play around with Gracie Perry's own persona. And therefore, when it says this vase, which is being knocked out, made by, with that informal colloquial language, by some Shirley Temple Mank, some failure at somebody trying to be like a cute child, okay? So you get that sort of facetious, maybe slightly risque tone to this poem with a poet who's not afraid, perhaps, maybe to be talking, to be quite controversial, perhaps, here in the poem. Delineating, so that just means describing or portraying, because we're talking about a vase here, so showing tales of kids in cars on crap estates. So the vase that's being looked at is one of those that seems to have these kids in cars on crap estate, like the one that's on the front of your anthology. The language, crap, so that, colloquial, informal expressions. Burberry-clad louts. So again, louts, informal. Burberry kind of associated with sometimes of gangs and hooliganism. Who flail their motors through the smoky night. So flail here is kind of like drive it hard, drive it fast, thrash it, beat it, ruin it, through the smoky night. And perhaps smoky connotations of something a bit dark, a bit dangerous in this scene that's on this vase. From Manchester to Motherwell or Slough. So names of cities and cities perhaps associated with working class. And also, if you look at where they are on a map, they're kind of spread out across the UK. Motherwell at the top, sort of in Scotland, then Manchester, and then Slough near London. So perhaps you could take from that the idea that Turnbull is talking about working classes throughout Britain. Creating bedlam, so chaos, confusion, on the Queen's highway. So there's a tension, there's a juxtaposition between kind of the Queen, the high status, the wealth, and the bedlam and chaos of the working class that's depicted on this vase. We've got the end stop, which kind of sort of finishes that first little section, an idea and an opportunity to pause. And then your, that sort of direct mode of address, talking to the urn, your gaudy evocation. So gaudy, again, like brash, extravagantly showy, a little bit similar to kind of kitsch that we had earlier, and to evoke, to create feelings. So your gaudy representation of feelings that you've put forward in this vase can somehow conjure the scene without inducing fright, as would a Daily Express expose. So after the end stop, it seems that here we have almost like the voice of an art critic. It's possibly what someone has said or would say about this urn, that it shows us the feelings and emotion of these working class youths in their cars in this scene, and yet it's not scary, it's not frightening, like a Daily Express article might be. So there does seem to be a tone of satire here, criticising tabloid newspapers that sensationalise, dramatise, exaggerate stories and kind of scaremonger. So that tone of satire and criticism can be seen there in that regard. Then that voice of the art critic seems to continue into the second stanza. It's the lines are adjourned, it's carrying on with the same idea, there was no end stop. So it's the art critic voice continuing to say what else this vase seems to bring to mind. Can bring to mind the throaty turbo roar of hatchbacks tuned almost to breaking point, the joyful throb of UK garage or of house imported from the continent. So you can imagine the voice of the art critic continuing to talk about what this vase is conjuring up in people's minds, what they can feel, what that evoking of feelings is. Throaty turbo roar, so throaty. It's almost kind of onomatopoeic, isn't it? You can hear the sounds of it. It helps to kind of picture or visualize and create a soundscape of those roaring engines, the throaty turbo roar, the almost personification, the animal imagery of that kind of roar, that loud sound. Hatchbacks tuned almost to breaking point. The work that's been done to these cars to kind of soup them up and make them more powerful. The joyful throb. So you've got throaty and throb. So the sounds there being kind of connected and conveying the kind of the loudness of this scene and perhaps the energy of this scene, and maybe a slight dangerous tone to it as well, although it is joyful. Talks about the music, UK garage and house imported from the continent. So for some readers, maybe some adult readers who perhaps experienced this in their youth, they'd be able to reflect on that and think about that. They remember listening to that garage music or that house music. Perhaps they'd remember the roars of those cars. So there could be some identification from some readers in this poem, but equally to lots of other readers who haven't experienced that, it'll be very unknown and not familiar at all. And then we've got the word yet. I've deliberately put them in the red and the blue because we do have a contrast between the red, loud, energetic imagery here and the only bit of blue and calm. So as you can see probably from the colours, the disproportion there. So this scene is about the energy and the recklessness and the loudness. And yet the art critic voice is sort of saying, despite all that, there's a sense of calm. You know, essentially this is an urn, it's a still image, and it's in this classic form, perhaps. So that's what brings the calmness. We've got the caesura here, creating that pause before that critical commentary seems to continue. And it kind of moves, it's almost seamless, but it kind of moves from the voice of perhaps a specific art critic or somebody looking at this vase as a piece of art into someone offering social commentary on society at the time. Because of course, like with lots of the other poems, this isn't just about this artwork, this pot, this urn. It is about a bigger, more universal idea behind it. This is about the working class youth. This is about society. This is about the divide between the rich and the poor. Those sorts of ideas come into play here. So the screech of the tires, so more noise, more aural imagery, creating that soundscape, and the nervous squeals, again, more noise, more aural imagery of girls. The enjambment perhaps focusing on the girls here, and then the further focus on those girls created by the comma here and here, making this a subordinate clause, creating a pause here and here. So we focus on this line, and like some of the other poems, it seems to be kind of a moment of reflection and a slightly more serious possible image to consider. These girls who are too young to quite appreciate the peril they are in. So for a moment, the poet has us think actually about the danger of this behaviour and how it isn't just fun, that it can sometimes cause harm. And again, for some readers who may look back and think about how they spent their youth, they may reflect and they may think about the danger they were in. Tragically, some people may have known of fatal car crashes or things that have gone wrong with this sort of behaviour. So there's that moment of reflection. So the girls screams, the girls who are too young to really appreciate the danger they're in, who think this is fun, who go along with it, who are having a good time, are heard. But these wheels will not lose traction, skid and flip. No harm befall these children. And like I said earlier on, there's lots of different interpretations for these couple of lines. These wheels will not lose traction. So literally, perhaps the wheels on the vase won't lose traction because this is just a piece of art. It isn't reality, so therefore, they're safe. It's nothing to be alarmed about. Alternatively, these wheels will not lose traction. No harm befall these children. Are we meant to take it literally in that tone of this being an admiration of the invincibility of youth? Or is it the satire? Is this actually sarcastic? Is it the idea that although this seems like fun, there is a darker, more serious, more dangerous side to it? And actually, okay, on this vase, the wheels won't lose traction, skid and flip, but in reality, they do. And I suppose you take that idea further of somebody finding this vase and looking at this scene, and perhaps they're not knowing those realities and be able to judge it on the urn that they have. Okay, then we've got a stop here. They will stay out late, and it continues on to the next stanza. Forever pumped on youth and ecstasy, on alloy, base and arrogance, and speed the back lanes. Okay, so the colloquial language continues in this stanza. We've got pumped, we've got urban, we've got buff, we've got geezer, pulsing juice, Calvins, lots and lots of colloquial expressions, lots of informal language in this stanza. We've got the listing of what they're pumped on: youth and ecstasy, alloy, base, arrogant, speed, back lanes. So that listing creates a kind of fast pace here, mirroring the fast pace or lifestyle perhaps of the people being depicted. Ecstasy can take on the double meaning here. Are they pumped on ecstasy? Ecstasy meaning to be full of joy, to feel euphoric, to feel incredibly happy. But obviously, of course, ecstasy is also a drug. And so is it hinting that maybe there's something more sinister to this behavior, and actually that they are fueled by not just joy, but actually through drugs? And then, as you go down here as well, charged with pulsing juice. The pulsing juice kind of seems to be a kind of reference to the hormones that are surging through the bodies of these young people. So the language, pulsing juice, or the adrenaline as well, and the hormones. But pulsing juice being used rather than that more formal standard English. Which even yet fill every pair of Calvins in each thong. So the reference to the underwear kind of furthers that idea of this being perhaps about the raging hormones of these young people and their lust, not just for life, but their lust for each other, which is then quite darkly portrayed with the idea of given head in crude games of chlamydia roulette. So the reference to kind of the STIs there, drawing attention to perhaps the prevalence of STIs in young people, in particular kind of young working class people. So that tone of satire, that darker tone sort of definitely comes through here, very, very clear to see. Interesting perhaps that, it's roulette, it's a game of risk, and the idea that this is kind of dangerous, risky behavior that these young people are involved in. And obviously the innuendos with the sexual innuendos with given head and so on. Just going back up here a little bit, sorry. Again, that idea of not having any responsibility. These people who are going out in their fast cars all night, they don't have work the next day. They're going to bed. And so is it a satire? Is it a criticism of that behaviour, the unemployment of these youths, perhaps? Therefore, is it a criticism of kind of the government and society more broadly? Or controversially, is it kind of just an admiration of how free these young people are, how without responsibility they are, and is it reflecting on that stage and that time in your life when you don't have all that responsibility, possibly? So again, different interpretations there. Okay, and then as this stanza moves on, it's either that the person looking at the urn now moves to another section of the urn. There's a kind of sense of it broadening in its perspective, or is it actually not specific to the urn, but this is now just the narrator thinking more broadly about those young people, not just those people in the cars, but all those people, these onlookers, all those people around that situation as well. So now see who comes to line the sparse grass verge. So let's look who else is here in this scene. To toast them in buckfast and diamond white. So a reference to these young people all there drinking alcohol, maybe underage, maybe illegally. And then who those people are: rat boys and cornrowed cheerleaders. So the rat boy is the kind of urban term for someone who is a neglected youth. So more suggestions that this is about poor people, poor working class youths, people who grow up in deprived areas, and this is how they fill their time or how they have fun. And they are urging the people to pull more burnouts or to write their donut O's. So the colloquial language continues, the idea of doing a burnout in your car or a donut in your car. A signature upon the bleached tarmac of dead suburban streets. Interestingly, almost in the tone of romantic poetry, we've got two references here to the kind of the absence of nature, the absence of the natural world. And like romantic poetry, which was all for how beautiful and brilliant the natural world was and how nature is and how that's what the life should be and how we shouldn't have the Industrial Revolution, which was ripping through the landscape and destroying everything. There's almost that similar message here as well, that without the natural things, this very urban setting, it's sparse, it's not very pleasant, bleached, all the life, all the beauty is out of it, dead. Okay, so even though this scene seems to be full of life and full of vibrancy, actually it's described as dead suburban streets, as if there's no soul here, that this is not natural behaviour, this is not good, this is not beautiful in what the kind of romantics would have considered. And again, the stop to kind of pause that after that sestet there. Their dogs set up a row and curtains twitch, as pensioners and parents telephone the cops to plead for quiet, sue for peace. Tranquility, though, is for the rich. So you can see here the repetition of P in pensioners, parents, plead, and peace. So it connects all of those together, and we get a very clear contrast in this stanza between the young, rowdy, reckless youths and the people who are despairing of that and whose peace is being destroyed. And they're pleading for peace, they're desperate for peace, they want peace. But then the caesura created by the dash at the end of the line, really, really important, focuses on this satirical comment at the end, perhaps is called tranquility, though, is for the rich. So there is a bigger idea being explored in this poem about the division between rich and poor. And that caesura that creates that pause emphasizes that division, that the rich and poor, according to this poem, are very, very different. And actually, in order to be tranquil, in order to be peaceful, in order to have a good, peaceful life, you need to be rich. And actually, the world of the poorer people, the working class people in this poem, is that bedlam world that was referred to earlier. It's lawless, whereas you have to be rich in order to obey the law. And obviously there'll be some people who think, well, that isn't true, and could challenge the poem in that way. And then finally, final stanza, you get the and so. So it seems to be a kind of suggesting this is going to bring the poem to a conclusion. And so, this is my concluding thoughts. This is the poet's or the speaker's concluding thoughts. And so, millennia hence. So in years to come, in the millennia that's to come forward, you garish crock. So talking about the crockery, the pottery, the vase, the urn, garish, again, like gaudy and kitsch that we had before. When all context is lost, galleries raised to level dust. So this is the narrator thinking about the future. When all context is lost, when we don't know who Grayson Perry is, perhaps, when we've only got the vase in front of us, when we don't know that this was his style of art, when the galleries, the art galleries have been razed, been burnt to the ground or destroyed, when they don't exist anymore, of level dust, and we're long in the box, and we now, the present, are dead. So these people in the future, looking back, no one to corroborate, no one to ask what the time was like. So that distant future. Will future poets look on you amazed? So this is a big question. Will they look on this vase? Will they be amazed, inspired? What will they think about it in the way that we've looked back at artifacts from the past, what will they think? Will they be amazed? Speculate. So these are the questions that comes across in this poem. Will they speculate how children might have lived when you were fired? So to fire in a kiln, when you were made. Lives so free and bountiful. So the poet starts to think, what will they think of it? Will they look at this urn and think, gosh, look at those people. They look so free. They look bountiful. Or obviously, is there a sarcasm there that they look at that vase of these cars and these youths and they think, it doesn't seem freedom. It doesn't seem bountiful. It didn't seem like they had plenty. Or will it? And therefore, is it a question about how art can be misinterpreted, or how we can misinterpret the past based on the artifacts that we find? And there, beneath the sun, a little colder, declare, how happy were those creatures then, who knew the truth was all negotiable, and beauty in the gift of the beholder. So the final lines are again inspired by Keats's original poem, Ode to a Grecian Urn. In Keats's poem, the lines were, beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all you know on earth and all you need to know. And remember, Keats's idea of what was beautiful was the natural world, was the nightingale, was autumn, was the leaves, was the trees, was the plants. And that was what you found beauty in, and that's what truth was. That's what it meant to live a joyful and purposeful life, was to be, at one with nature and not obsessed with the material things or individualism. And yet, in this poem, will they declare, when they look at this vase, that we thought in society today the truth was all negotiable? Everyone has different views and different ideas. Everyone doesn't just think that nature is the most wonderful, beautiful, only truth, and living that simple life is the only way to find satisfaction. There are some people who would think the advances in technology that we have are brilliant and amazing, and industry and science and all those sorts of things. So will they look at the vase and will they think that we thought truth was negotiable, that it was up to you, that you decided how you lived your life and what you were happy with and what you weren't? Would they look at that vase, which to lots of people perhaps is garish or gaudy and attractive, and think beauty is in the eye of the beholder? Because for some, Grayson Perry's art, is beautiful, is wonderful, is a work of art, is aesthetically pleasing. But there'll be some perhaps who think that's not the case. So, yeah, an interesting poem. Different ideas there, I suppose, about time passing, about young people, about youth, satire. So start to think about the connections you could make perhaps between this poem and your other poem. Okay, that's it from me. Take care.